I want you all to meet him. Girls, you're going to love him. George Lazenby. Yeah. All right. This is the first time I have ever talked to a James Bond.
I've lost my voice.
You've lost your... Don't do that to me. We had enough trouble tonight, you know. First of all, tell me, George, about James Bond. Why did you did one James Bond movie, as 007, and why didn't you do any more?
To cut a long story short, I kind of had the idea in my head that I could go on to better things.
Mm-hmm.
And I just left it alone. And it didn't work out that way.
Well, how many guys were actually up for that part, the James Bond role?
You mean you weren't there?
No,
Everybody else was.
Were there that many, really?
Well, it looked that many when I started, but we thinned them out a little.
And did you have to do a series of screen tests for that to get the part?
Yeah, quite a few. That's how I learned to act.
You mean you weren't an actor before?
No, I was a male model.
You were? We don't have to put your head down. There's a lot of male models around. What, does that have a connotation? I think it does, yes. A lot of people think if you're a male model, you walk funny or something, right?
Yeah, well, the girls go around okay, but the guys just weren't acceptable, so I thought, well, try out for something better.
Okay. Okay, now, how did you get from being 007 and then having that sort of phase out and get yourself to Hong Kong? Now, you spend I must explain first, you spend most of your time in Hong Kong now doing these Kung Fu movies.
Yeah, the last 2 years I've spent doing it, mostly in Chinese. It's the first one I've done in English, but it's a long story, and it all started with, well, after I did James Bond, I went sailing on a boat to kind of get my head together and my feet back on the ground, and there was a lady with me who got pregnant.
By you?
Well, I couldn't bring the fishes. There was
Oh, I see.
right. So,
well, it's Australia. It's no big deal. Anybody can do it.
Yeah, my father did.
Did he? Yeah.
So I sent her off to Spain to sit with her mother while I figured out what I was going to do.
Mm.
And
no, it's all right. Go ahead. Talk. Don't let me distract you.
And I had a boat at the time, as I told you, and I had to get rid of it. So I took it to Monte Carlo, whereas the best place to sell it, because the Monte Carlo rally was on at the time. There were lots of people walking around who'd like to say to their friends at a dinner party that night, I just bought a boat. So I put a for sale sign up in mine and sat there with it, smoking a cigarette on the deck and waiting for a guy to come past. And an Italian dentist who I wouldn't go to said, I'll buy your boat. How much do you want for it? And he took it off me, and I went back to London and lived like James Bond for a while on the money. And a friend of mine who's a bit of a dandy came over from Paris and said, look, I got a quick, fast way of making a buck. I'm doing this gambling scene. I said, well, look, I want to get into the movies. So I went to the movies in Leicester Square to see what's happening all around me, because no one was making any tracks to my door at the time in London. And he was Bruce Lee, this fabulous guy, floating around the screen. I said, well, I can't do that, but maybe I can be his buddy on the screen. So I saw underneath it, Singapore, Distributors Cathay, blah, blah, blah. So I bought myself a couple of, one ticket, and this dandy friend of mine said, I'll go along as your manager. He was a gambler. He used to be another male model in Paris with me. And I said, fine, you just look the part. You can do all the talking, and I'll tell you what's going on. So when we got... the night before we went, he said, let's make some money before we go so we can, really live it up big. And I said, well, I've only got 200 pounds left for my money from the boat. And my lady's in Spain, and I got to, do the right thing by her.
Yeah.
And he said, well, 200 pounds is enough. So I took 150 with me along to this gambling place. And we were going great, but he brought a couple of girls along, and our minds started to wander, and we weren't following the system that he already organized, and we blew it.
So you were broke?
Well, I had 50 pounds left, but then he said, sorry, mate, I can't come. And he said, but you can have my ticket. And I said, what's good's another ticket to me?
Yeah.
And he said, try and find someone rich to come with you. And I said, I got 8 hours.
Not much time.
Yeah, right. So go on.
Yeah, well, no, I just wanted to try to move it along. So you got to Singapore.
Yeah.
Is that right? On a, from what we were talking about, you got to Singapore on a freebie ticket or something, or it didn't cost you. Oh no, his ticket. He gave you his ticket. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And when I was in Singapore, I had a secretary with me, you know, way out in the front type of lady. There was a good front.
A good-looking secretary
Yeah,
with
right.
a lot of front. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, I got it. Go ahead.
And she was running around finding out what was going on in the movies, and we found out that Run Run Shaw was the guy that was in charge.
Who?
Run Run Shaw?
That's his name.
Yeah, but he wasn't in Singapore. Run Me was in Singapore.
Run Me.
That's his brother.
Run Me Show.
Run Me Shaw, yeah. So I went to see Run Me Shaw, and Run Me sent his son, Run Me King Shaw.
You're not putting me on because this is true. Run Shaw, Run Me Shaw, and Run
Right.
King Shaw.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I felt
If
that,
he has a son named Rick Shaw, I'm getting out of here. Now that's...
So I felt that it was time I met this guy, and Run Me King Shaw came running down to my place, picked me up, and I went to his place. And the funny situation was, when we got to the gate, there was a guard up there with a shotgun, and I said, "What's that all about?" And he said, "Don't worry about it. I've been kidnapped 3 times. I don't want the 4th time to happen."
Oh, my.
Because they run him across to Kuala Lumpur and asked the father for the money to give the son back. You know what they do in kidnapping?
Yeah.
So then the dogs were barking at the gate, and we went in through the gate and stopped in the car, and he said, "Don't get out." And I said, "Don't worry, I won't." The dogs up at the window, you know, I couldn't see through them for the lick marks. Anyway, he got the dogs hidden away, and then I went inside, and Run Me Shaw said, "Nice to meet you, but you must meet my father, my brother. He's in Hong Kong, Run Run Shaw."
Yeah.
At that time, I was about to change my name to Run Run because I was running all over the place.
Meantime, you broke it over there.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I
So
spent
you
much.
You get to Hong Kong now to see who the Bruce Lee that you saw in the movie.
Yeah, I hustled a ticket, and I went to Hong Kong, and when I got there, I went straight to Bruce Lee's office because I didn't want any more running around. You know, with these guys run here, run there, go there, come here. And this guy said, "Look, I'd like to meet Bruce." And he said, "Who are you?" I told him George Lazenby, and he said, "Oh," and I said, "James Bond." He said, "Oh, very well, you can meet Bruce." "Bruce, I have James Bond here to meet you. Would you like to see him?" And Bruce says, "No." So come all this way.
Really makes you
So I
secure.
just sat there, you know, I was out of wind, out of breath, out of money, everything. And finally Bruce came out of the editing room, whatever he was doing, and ignored me there for a while, and finally asked everyone to lunch and turned around to me. He said, "You come to lunch?" I said, "Phew, yeah." And we went to lunch, and we got along fine. You know, in the car, we swapped a few names that we knew, and et cetera, and all the people stood up in the restaurant for him like they used to for me when I was James Bond, and we went through the whole thing.
He was really a big hero there in Hong Kong, wasn't he?
He
Bruce
was
Lee?
the king of Hong Kong. I mean, we got pulled up by a policeman on the way. I shouldn't say this, I suppose.
No,
but,
go ahead, it's all right.
His wife was driving the car, and I was sitting next to her with his secretary on my knee, and he was in the back with a bodyguard. And this cop was sort of giving his wife a lot of lip, you know, and I was looking at Bruce, and then he bent down like this. He said, "Ah, Mr. Lee," and goes the police escort to the restaurant.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
I want them to see one thing from Man from Hong Kong, and then we'll get back and we can sort of wrap this up. This is a car chase, which you are not in, but it's really an exciting piece of film, in this film that's now showing here.
Oh, I just drove it for him.
Did you? No, you I knew you would. Take a look at this. I just want you to see this car chase here. just before we wrap up with George and George leaves us, I just want to tell him one thing. When they're doing those movies, those kung fu movies in Hong Kong, nobody there speaks English, you see, except George. So tell him how you do the dialogue.
Well, this is not counting Man from Hong Kong. We had an Australian crew on this, and they do speak a kind of English. But meanwhile...
Yes, right, yeah, sort of, yeah.
So when I first got there, I had an interpreter. He got fired because he was bluffing. He didn't really know how to interpret Chinese into English, and nobody does. Right? So the guy said to me, the director, he said, you got do this scene and say this dialogue here. And he'd run through the movements, and then the guy would get over there and move his dialogue, and I had to count the number of times he moved his mouth, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd go over there and say whatever I liked and move my mouth with the same expression. And this is the way it was. And I said, well, why don't you worry about the dialogue? He says, it's not important. It's just to get us on to the next fight.
So they dub in the dialogue at the amount of times you move your lips.
Right.
Yeah.
What
What did you really say? Can you tell me? Never mind. I don't want to get in trouble,
Too many people watching.
Right. We have to move on. Ladies and gentlemen, would you thank him, please? George Lazenby. We'll be right back on the Mercedes. Don't you go away. Hold it.